So we're here to talk about the RFP for the Main Street Economic Revitalization Program. And here we go. Now we're working. So today's, we're going to introduce the program. We're going to talk about, provide a detailed program overview, and then we're going to get really into the nitty gritty here and talk about the request for proposals. There's a lot of information we want to cover, and I want to make sure, I think the most valuable use of your time is really at the end, where we can talk about questions that are bubbling up that aren't quite maybe apparent in the RFP. So I want to make sure we save time for the end. So I'm going to be covering a whole lot of material, but of course we'll make this recording available. This deck will be available. Of course, the RFP will be available as well. And so there'll be plenty more opportunities to go back and dive into the details of this stuff. So why this new program? Well, Minnesota's economy has had one of its most tumultuous 2 years in modern memory. And we need to make sure that consumer confidence and momentum are critical, are supported, and are critical to a strong recovery. This has been a very unique recession. There's been a very unique impacts that have been strongly concentrated in those areas where consumers go out and want to spend their money. Restaurants, accommodations, tourism industries, things like that, where there's a concentration of commercial activity. And that helps drive prosperity and business growth, and also livability, and making sure that we have vibrant, revitalized communities that people want to live and play and work. And so the governor and legislators wanted to create a vehicle for funding development in these corridors that will help jumpstart and accelerate our economic growth. And I just want to make sure people can see my screen. Yeah. Okay. All right, cool. That's all right. And so here's the tool, the Main Street Economic Revitalization Program. Now, how does this work? This $80 million was appropriated for this program. $40 million has gone out in roughly $38 million has gone out in round one, and then in round two, about $41 million will be available. How are these funds used? These funds are used to provide funds to partner organizations that will then establish programs within their service area and their communities to support economic development and redevelopment projects that deliver the most economic impact in communities with the greatest needs due to conditions that have arisen since March 15th, 2020. Now, we're going to go into some details of what we mean by greatest needs and conditions and all that. But this program will deliver 30% matching grants up to $750,000 per project, or I should say, 80% loan guarantees for loans up to $2 million loan per project. So those are the main tools. Loan guarantees that will be guaranteed by the state, or matching grants that will cover 30% of the project costs, up to $750,000 grant per project. And of course, a total of $80 million is available statewide, and no more than $40 million was available in the first round. And in the second round, there'll be approximately $41 million available. And I'm not going to read out every single definition here, but I just want to call out what do we mean by commercial corridor? What do we mean by Main Street, right? And commercial corridor is a little bit broader definition that include an area that spans perhaps multiple cities, or maybe it's an area within the city that you wouldn't necessarily say is the main street, but is a main street within a city. Or once again, an area that maybe spans several cities. An example I like to point out is, driving up 61, let's say you're headed to Grand Marais or something for a vacation. There's all those, there's Silver Bay, Beaver Bay, Two Harbors. There's all those towns along the way that a lot of tourists frequent and all that. You could define that as a commercial corridor, for example, not just the individual town. And then of course, Main Street, we kind of know what we mean by this, but a single town, an area within a single town that's the concentration of commercial activity in that town. And so we'll talk about what we're going to be asking for and defining those commercial corridors and main streets in a bit. And then the rest of it we'll talk about in terms of qualifying conditions, partner organizations, eligible recipients, and program partners throughout this. So how's this program structured? So partner organizations will submit a proposal through this RFP directly to DEED for funds targeting one or more main streets or corridors. I want to call out just up at the top that this isn't, if you're, let's say you're a business owner in an impacted community, and you're interested in securing funds for your redevelopment project, you wouldn't apply directly to this program. This is for the community, the partner organizations to apply for an allocation of funding, and then they will then work with eligible recipients within their communities to solicit applications, make award decisions, and then make those funds available to eligible recipients. So, yeah, proposals will be evaluated and awarded based on the greatest need and economic impact. And then once those award decisions are made, partner organizations will establish programs that will target specific geographic areas with state matching funds. And then eligible recipients then, of course, receive the financing via grants or loans to complete those projects. And once again, eligible recipients, the actual end users of these funds, do not apply directly to DEED for these funds. So needs and conditions. What do we mean by needs and conditions? We need proposals to define a specific geography, and that includes one or more commercial corridors impacted by conditions that have arisen since March 15, 2020. What do we mean by this? Most relevant for the broad swath of the state is likely going to be COVID-19, the specific impacts of this pandemic on retail corridors, retail businesses, bars, restaurants, tourism, accommodations, and other areas that have been directly impacted by the virus itself and the reduction of customer activity, or executive order, for example, impacts that may have restricted business activity so that we could mitigate the spread of the virus. But that also could include things not necessarily directly related to the pandemic, such as a major employer enclosure or multiple commercial space vacancies that have had significant impact on the corridor or Main Street. Maybe connected to the pandemic or not connected to the pandemic. It just happened to happen after March 15th, 2020. That would be eligible. And of course, one particular urgent need in the Twin Cities and corridors along Lake Street and University is the widespread property damage due to fire and due to civil unrest. But that could also include, fires that may have been an accidental fire, natural disasters, and so on and so forth. And so the key thing is what happened after March 15th, such that these funds are needed to help revitalize that specific corridor. Partner organizations. So only a few types of organizations can actually apply for these funds and receive these funds to run these programs. And that includes foundations engaged in economic development, community development financial institutions, and nonprofit organizations engaged in housing and commercial development. The key thing there is we want to make sure that organizations have some experience in this work. These are going to be complicated development deals. They need to be able to evaluate pretty complicated development projects and whether or not they'll actually succeed, understand the financing of those projects. So we want to make sure that partner organizations have that expertise on staff, do this work already in some capacity, and can have the capacity to meet the objectives of this program. Partner organizations, 4% of a grant will be set aside for their administrative costs to defray the cost of actually doing all this work. Who's not eligible? Local governments and political subdivisions, including economic development authorities, port authorities, et cetera, are not eligible to directly apply for and receive these funds. That also includes for-profit organizations and developers. Now, I want to draw a distinction. We fully expect local governments and political subdivisions to be partners in this work. Maybe they're co-funding some of this work. Maybe they're helping to coordinate, facilitate the outreach in some of these pieces. Maybe they're helping to set priorities for a particular corridor. We do actually want to see partnership and dialogue with local governments and economic development authorities in this work. They just can't be the direct recipient of the funds, and the funds can't be used for property and facilities owned by those local governments. But they can definitely contribute funds and be a part of the project, and we expect that. And then for-profit organizations and developers. These will be the folks that are the subject of these grants. Oftentimes they'll be the ones applying for the funds, and so obviously they can't receive the funds directly from the state for their own projects. So what are some examples of partner organizations? For example, a foundation that runs loans and grant programs assisting entrepreneurs or funds community development efforts, or a CDFI that develops commercial real estate for diverse entrepreneurs and low-income communities, or a nonprofit organization that supports the redevelopment of historic main streets. So those are some examples, and there's no doubt going to be a number of examples that are eligible that are not enumerated here. And eligible recipients, this is, when we talk about eligible recipients, we're talking about the end user of these funds, the actual businesses or the nonprofits within these commercial corridors that are going to be receiving these grants or loans to do these projects. And what are we talking about? We're talking about businesses and property owners, nonprofit organizations, and of course, developers, both for-profit and nonprofit developers. This does not include local governments. Local governments cannot apply for these funds to a partner organization. They can co-fund a project, but they cannot receive funds for, think about a hockey rink owned by a city and it needs a new roof or something. That couldn't be the subject of this. So here's some examples of eligible recipients. A property owner whose building was damaged by fire and wants to leverage their insurance proceeds to redevelop the property. Or another example, a developer who has purchased a vacant lot and wants to develop it into a mixed-use facility with commercial and housing space. So those are just a few examples. Now, what can these eligible recipients actually use the money for, both loans and grants? They can use it for repair, building construction, landscaping, demolition and site prep, pre-design, design, engineering, infrastructure, and related site amenities. Now, one thing that we'll be asking partner organizations that are funded is, how do we prioritize these different activities? If all we're doing is just funding pre-design, design, and demolition, but nothing new is actually being built, I don't think the program will be as impactful as it could be, right? In so much that demolition and pre-design and design are a part of a successful project and a cost that needs to be covered to make sure that project gets completed, that's all great, but we can't just be spending all these public dollars on pre-design, design, and demolition and site prep. We want to be building buildings. We want to add new things, new features, improvements that will actually help revitalize the corridor directly with these funds. So in so much that those other costs are supportive of that, then of course those are eligible. Eligible uses does not include the purchase of real estate or business operations or business operating expenses such as inventory, wages, or working capital. Now I'm going to talk about one of the two main tools that revitalization programs deployed by partner organizations will have at their disposal. First one is going to be leveraged grants. So a leveraged grant can cover up to 30% of an eligible cost. That's that's the state dollars, up to $750,000 in state funds. And then grants must be matched with non-state funds at 200% of the state's portion of the grant. And what do we mean by matching funds? Matching funds can come from a variety of sources. Funds can be contributed by the partner organizations themselves if they've done some fundraising around this, and they can contribute those funds via a grant to an eligible recipient, or the funds can come from the eligible recipient themselves. Let's say they have insurance proceeds, and they can bring those to the table as part of their equity in a project, or loan proceeds that are offered by a partner organization, or a loan proceeds that an eligible recipient has secured on their own. Private grants, cash donations, other donations, local government contributions. And one thing is that you can also count the non-guaranteed portion of a guaranteed loan as part of the matching for this program. So that's a nice little feature there. So you can imagine some projects may have a grant, a leverage grant, and a loan that's guaranteed by this program as part of their capital stack for that project, that's perfectly that's encouraged, and that's great. And then matching funds sourced from other assets and sources must be restricted for use exclusively through this program. So if you're proposing match, you can't just point to your existing loan fund and say, yeah, we have a loan fund, and we'll use it. It's like, we want to know, okay, are you actually setting aside those loan funds for this program? And you have to demonstrate that to us in your proposal. And then an eligible project must have secured commitments from all required matching funds and all development approvals before a leverage grant may be distributed. So if you're running one of these programs, you're soliciting applications, and you make an award decision before you hand a dollar over and before we can authorize those dollars be released, you need to demonstrate that that project has secured all those commitments before dollars can be transferred. So here's an example table just showing an example of a single leveraged grant. Right. So to get the maximum of $750,000, we need to see 200% minimum matching contribution. The key thing to understand about that 200% minimum is that cannot include state or federal funds, right? That 60% of, assuming a $2.5 million project, 60% of the funds have to come from non-state or federal sources. So we talked about what that looked like in the previous. And then, of course, there's still another 10% gap there to make sure that we're hitting the minimum matching requirements. Those funds can come from state or federal funds. So you can imagine a local government that has an ARP-funded grant program or a loan program. That's where the federal funds can come in, or state funds can come in and be a part of the total project cost. And so then for a $750,000 leverage grant, we would see a total project cost of at least $250 or $2.5 million. We'd imagine a number of projects will exceed that. You know, you can have a $10 million project, but of course, the state's contribution is limited at the $750,000 level. Guaranteed loans. So this is another tool that's available. So we'll offer 80% loan guarantee for loans up to $2 million. And this is for loans that are made by a private entity, non-state or federal sources. And the loan guarantees are for a maximum of 15 years from the origination of the loan. And we will set aside 25% of the value of the loan from program funds into a trust fund to pay out defaulted loans. So we don't expect a default rate in excess of 30% for these. And so we think 25% of the value of the loan should be sufficient to cover any defaults. Of course, that's not 100% coverage for all the guaranteed loans. So when you're looking at this, you know, talk to your loan committee, talk to your financing experts to think about, you know, what risk you're taking on by taking loans here, because it isn't backed by the full faith and credit, for example, of the United States or the state of Minnesota. It's only backed by the trust fund, and that trust fund is available to all the organizations that are authorized to make loans under this. And so you have to think about, well, you know, if there's 6 organizations making loans for this, they're all held, you know, to the same underwriting standards that we impose, but it adds some complexity in the risk calculation and the attractiveness of that loan, considering it's not going to be, it could be oversubscribed. But we don't expect that. So we think 25% will be sufficient. We're fairly confident of that based on past performance and related programs. And of course, the guaranteed portion of the loan may be subordinate to other loans made by lenders in the overall financing package. And once again, an eligible project must have required development approvals and full funding before that loan is distributed. We don't expect every organization submitting a proposal to participate in the loan program. Some will most will participate in, they'll submit a request for grants, and some may also participate in loans. And if you are interested in submitting a loan-only proposal, you're fully welcome to do that, and we can accommodate that. But I'd imagine most will go in for grants, and some will go in for grants and loans. That's been our experience with round one. Here's an example of a single guaranteed loan. So the maximum loan would be $2 million. Obviously, you'll be authorized to offer a loan more than $2 million. We just won't guarantee beyond the 80% of $2 million, so $1.6 million. We'll set aside 25% of the value of that loan in the trust fund to pay out. So this total state commitment on that is $500,000, and of course we'll purchase the remaining principal on that should there be a default from the trust fund, contingent on funds. What happens if funds run out? We'll talk about that in a second, but we don't expect that to happen. So here's an example of a guaranteed loan application. So when you're submitting a proposal, you're going to ask us, hey, we'd like to loan out X amount of dollars, which there's an associated amount of loan guarantees and then associated amount of loan guarantee trust funds. So you tell us we expect to make and we want to make X amount of dollars in loans, and then you'll document how many loan guarantees you want us to set aside, the total allocation of loan guarantees set aside specific for your program. I want to talk about administrative costs. So 4% of a grant to a partner organization may be used for administration and monitoring of your program. And eligible costs under that include personnel, fringe benefits, and all the other costs here. Administrative costs may include a portion of the following expenses listed there. Administrative costs, those are indirect costs like, executive director salaries, rent, utilities, that kind of stuff. And the leverage, your admin funds will be, of course, based on your leverage grant allocation. So, for example, if you're requesting a $10 million allocation in leverage grants, then 4% of that will be available to you in admin, or 4% on top of that will be available to you in admin funds. Matching. Oh, I will call out for those maybe familiar with round one is there isn't a complementary admin allocation for loan allocations. We allowed that last time, but we don't think that that's actually terribly useful. And it's a pretty low dollar amount. And anyways, if you're giving out loans, you're charging an interest rate, which presumably covers your costs. So there is not admin funds available for loan allocations and loans made. Just so you know, that's a change in round two. Matching funds and deadlines. So partner organizations must have matching funds identified and committed, or will do so within the 15-month period following the awarding of grant funds. What does this mean? What this means is that the project doesn't necessarily have to be completed within that 15 months, but for any grants or loans that you're seeking to make an award, they must have secured and started their project and been awarded within 15 months, right, of the partner organization being under contract. So there is a clock ticking. Why is that clock ticking? Because some of these projects won't go through. You'll award, they'll apply, something happens, you set aside that allocation, it doesn't work. We need to recoup those funds so that we can then re-award that back out in a third round. So there's a third round if there are funds left over. So we need to make sure that we have enough time to get those funds back and then get that back out the door and working. Once again, matching funds includes these following categories. And no grants or loans may be made after December 31st, 2024, and all funded projects must be completed by December 31st, 2026. Collaboration. So in your proposal, you may identify partners that you want to work with. We allow that and encourage it to meet program objectives. We can imagine partner organizations contracting out services to do community outreach and facilitation. Maybe they want to do loans, but they're not going to be the lender themselves, so they're going to work with a lender to actually do the financing through a bank or CDFI or any number of other types of lenders. Maybe they want to provide technical assistance to recipients to help them apply for the funds. That's perfectly legitimate and encouraged. Or they want to engage in community review process. So we want to know who your partners are. and what they're bringing to the table, and if they're being compensated for their work, or if they're providing in-kind match or contributions. Of course, we have to be very careful about conflicts of interest and award decisions. We fully expect that a lot of the partner organizations applying, maybe staff is on a board of another nonprofit in the community, or, somebody works at another business or something like that, if that is the subject of an application. That's totally fine. We want to hear, what is your plan for handling the conflicts of interest in the award decision process? Who gets funded and who doesn't, right? And so in your proposal, please address that and map that out. We really expect organizations to be familiar with how to navigate these issues. And we want to see some good plans around this. And of course, partner organizations can't fund their own projects or the projects of their collaborators. So that's something to keep in mind when you're thinking about potential collaborators. Maybe one of your potential collaborators could be the subject of a grant. Well, maybe they shouldn't be a partner, right? So they'll have to decide their proper role there. Now, partner organizations and their collaborators can request funds from another partner organization, but they must meet all the same requirements as any other recipient. And obviously, the award decision-making process needs to abide by conflict of interest rules and policies. So now we're going to transition to, I've provided an overview of the program. Now I'm going to transition to the actual nitty-gritty of the request for proposals itself. And I want to make sure we get through that quickly so we leave some time for questions. So the request for proposals was published on January 27th, and proposals will be due February 28th by 4 p.m. Please submit those via email in PDF format to the following email address. I'll just read that out loud for transcription's sake. So that's mserp.deed@state.mn.us. Also, if you have any questions after this session, submit those questions to that same email address, and we will frequently update the FAQ throughout the proposal, the open proposal period. And then we hope to announce those awards March, April 2022. So now I'm going to talk about the proposal content itself. The proposal will, of course, define a service area and qualifying conditions. We want to see demonstration of economic impact of those investments, and that the partner organization has the qualifications and capacities to successfully implement this program, and how they will actually do this work. How are they going to conduct outreach? How are they going to request or solicit requests for assistance, make award decisions, and include impacted communities in the process? And we'll go into a little bit of details about each of those later. Here's an outline of the proposal format. There's a cover letter and program summary. That's Form 1. That's to help you and help us understand just very quickly what it is that you propose doing. And then there's the proposal narrative and those following sections. And then if you are seeking a loan allocation, there's a separate lender enrollment form, and fill that out, submit it to us, and we will review that to make sure that your lending policies meet the requirements of the program. And then there's a partnership chart, not chat. There's a typo there. A partnership chart, just so you can spell out, if you do have partners, what exactly they're contributing and what their role is and the value that they're adding to the overall project. And then there's additional required documents, affidavit of non-collusion, conflict of interest, and a pre-award risk assessment and financial review. How are we going to evaluate this? So a review committee will be composed of state staff and community reviewers, and we will be scoring each proposal on a 100-point scale in the following categories that we saw before. And scores are averaged and proposals ranked, and a recommendation for funding is made. And then we offer that recommendation to the Commissioner of Deed, who will then review that recommendation and is responsible for final award decisions. And of course, those decisions are final and not subject to appeal. So now I'm going to dive into the specific sections here. I just want to cover this very quickly. The The cover letter and program summary will provide a brief overview of the proposed revitalization program. This is where you'll spell out exactly what you're requesting in terms of the allocation amounts. So be very careful as you're walking through those tables, that making sure everything adds up and that you understand how much you're requesting in terms of loan allocations or grant allocations, and identifying those matching sources. We don't score this separately from the rest of the proposal. It's really the narratives that scored, but everything that is in the cover letter and program summary should be also spelled out in the narrative sections. Program design and work plan. This is where you're going to tell us what you're actually going to do and how you're going to do it. And we want to see how you address these following categories. You know, for example, what's your diversity, equity, and inclusion plan? What's your lending and underwriting process, and so on. And then what's your service area and project need? Where are you actually going to do this work, and why are these funds needed within this particular community? What are those needs? So we want you to identify that. And then economic impact. Now, you know, we've had some questions like, well, how do we show the potential impact? We fully expect that these are going to be estimates. The finer and more rigorous the estimates, that goes to the competitiveness of your proposal. But you know, do your best to estimate. You know, if you're requesting you know, an allocation of 10 million in a particular area, tell us, you know, how many projects do you expect to actually fund through this, and you know, what are those potential impacts, and anything that you can do to add supporting information to those estimates to really demonstrate the value of that, the better your proposal will be off. The better your proposal will be. And we provided some tables. Use those, modifies those as you see fit for your specific project. Matching funds and leverage. We want to, of course, see you know, what is going to be the sources of matching funds. Of course, we fully expect that a lot of the sources for the matching funds is going to be from the eligible recipients themselves. So how would you know where those sources are? Well, spell that out. You know, where are those sources that are committed now up front, and what are those sources that are non-committed, but that you and your team feel confident that you'll be able to secure those within that 15-month period. Once again, this is just covering what those matching funds can include. And then organizational capacity. We want to make sure that organizations funded through this program and responsible for implementing this stuff have the scale, experience, and qualifications to be successful. You know, do you have the people power with the qualifications to implement a revitalization program? If you're proposing a loan program, we need to know that you have, you know, a good team that can handle pretty complicated loans and the financing process. And what is your organization's experience in development and redevelopment? And if you're working in diverse communities with language needs, do you have people on staff, or do you have partners that you're working with those language skills and cultural competencies to work with those diverse communities? And then if you are lacking in any particular area, do you have the program partners to bolster your capacity in any of these areas where your organization maybe doesn't specialize in? And then community support. We want to know that if you're going to be working in this community, that you have the support of the communities, both the residents, the stakeholders, local governments, chambers, community-based organizations in those communities, that there's an appetite for these funds, that they've been engaged, that their input has been solicited or will be solicited throughout the process. And so you'll be able to demonstrate that in your proposal. Just very briefly, Form 2 is the lender enrollment form. So if you are proposing a loan program, fill that form out and let us know, you know, what your capacity and experience is to manage a loan portfolio. And it also spells out some terms and conditions that you should be aware of before jumping in on this. And the partnership chart, that's another form that'll just, you know, it's just a table where you list out all your partners. Pretty self-explanatory. And then this is another required form. I just want to talk about this real quick because this kind of confuses folks. So the content of your proposal is non-public data until the conclusion of the awarding process. Now, of course, that doesn't mean you can't talk to people about if you're looking for partners to collaborate with, you can't talk about your possible plans. But unless they're an actual partner that's subject to your end proposal, you can't be sharing the content of your proposal. Several organizations, you could, this is a competitive process, and so you got to make sure that we protect the integrity of the competitive process. And so you have to submit those proposals independently. So, proceed with caution, and you can talk generally about your plans if you're trying to work with communities, but you can't be, sharing those proposals and having people line edit those, and colluding with each other to secure these funds. And that's all common sense, but I just want to make sure you understand what that affidavit of non-collusion is actually getting at. Once again, another requirement is conflict of interest disclosure. And so please review that and fill that out. You're obligated to help us meet our grants management policies under this. And then the financial review. So this is applicable, well, there's not going to be any public entities applying, so this is applicable to all. This doesn't impact your award decision. We just need to know, we need to understand how your organization is set up, and that if they have the financial capability to handle a grant of this size. And so we want to see, based on your organization size, a 990 or financial audit. So there. And then here's a couple other post-selection requirements to be aware of. So any recipient receiving more than $200,000 in grants or $500,000 in loan proceeds must comply with prevailing wage. And you can find some more information there. And you also will eventually, if you're not registered already, will need to be registered with the state. If you haven't done that already, just go ahead and get that done so you can provide us your vendor registration number in the proposal, and that'll just make it a little bit smoother if you're awarded to get through the contracting process. Just a note on prevailing wage, the key thing there is that, if you do award somebody over 200,000, when you execute a grant agreement with them, they will take on that obligation to meet prevailing wage requirements under that. And we could talk all day about that, just so you know. So now I want to open it up for questions. We have about 20 minutes left. And just so you know, here's the program website where there's already an FAQ posted. Review that. And if your question isn't addressed, email your question to this address, and we will address that question and post it on the FAQ. But now I want to open it up for questions to the group. So if you have a question, you can drop it in the chat. I'm going to go here to our meeting. And go ahead and unmute or drop it in the chat, whatever you're comfortable with. We got a lot of folks, so please raise your hand if you want to ask a question over audio, and then we'll figure out the best way to call on you. But I'll start out with questions in the chat, and then go ahead and raise your hand right now if you have a question, then we'll just go through. Let's see. Find all these questions. Eric, if you can help me find questions. Let's see. Joanne Smith asks, related site amenities. Does that include replacing equipment used to run a business? That's an interesting question. So, think about durable equipment like setting up a kitchen, like a vent hood and all that kind of stuff. Is that an eligible use of funds? If it's a fixed capital investment that lives on in the property beyond the use of that particular business, then that is a potentially eligible project. But we want to see it overall about how that's part of the revitalization project. Jason asks, can you provide more specific examples of what type of businesses will qualify to apply? So it all depends on really what we're focused on is a particular Main Street or commercial corridor that is proposed, and then any entity that meets those eligibility requirements, if they have an eligible project, would then presumably be eligible to apply to a partner organization for funds. So we can imagine, I just think about a commercial corridor that has, ranging from a grocery store to a nonprofit to a business incubator to a private business. All of those entities are potentially eligible. The only entities that wouldn't be eligible would be like a public-owned facility. So if like a deeds office is on a main street, we couldn't, of course, get these funds to, upgrade our facility, or a local government's city hall or something like that. That would not be eligible. Next question is, can clinics apply for construction work on COVID related work? A clinic, in so much that it is within an identified commercial corridor or main street, and that is part of a revitalization effort, yeah, they'd just be treated like any other organization. The key thing is like, how is that project related to revitalizing the corridor? Maybe it's making the clinic, expanding the clinic to take more customers or bring more people to a particular area. They're not necessarily excluded. It's just the question is how is that part of increasing the economic impact in that corridor as it relates to the conditions that you're talking about. Sarah asked, can we use IRRR dollars as non-state funds for this grant? That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. Are those dollars considered state dollars? They can definitely be part of the 10%, but I have to get back to you on whether or not those are considered local dollars or state dollars. So Sarah, thanks for that great question. And feel free to email that inbox and we'll follow up on that. So that's a good question that hasn't come up yet. Rebecca asked, we have a sportsman club that is working on taking down their building and putting up a new facility. They've asked the EDA to look into this program. Would this be something that could be applied? If the ADA couldn't apply, could the HRA? So in so much that it's a public entity like an economic development authority, it couldn't directly apply. But if there was a community organization or foundation or nonprofit or anything else that could qualify, they could apply. Specific to the sportsman club, the thing that we're looking at is if it's just a one-off project, that's not what we're really looking for. We're looking at what's the corridor and what is the number of projects, more than just one project, that would be funded through this. So if that sportsman club is on a main street and it's next to a restaurant, next to a hotel, next to whatever else, and it's going to be part of an overall revitalization effort, the sportsman club is perfectly eligible, subject of a grant or a loan. But what we're not looking for, what we're trying to avoid, is just one-off projects. So we wouldn't want to see a proposal that comes into us saying, yeah, we're just going to work on this one sportsman club and then that's it. We're not going to do, and that's our revitalization effort. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for comprehensive strategic programs that cover multiple users, multiple potential eligible recipients within one or more main streets or commercial corridors. Sarah asked, when will partner organizations tab be updated with first round awards? We're in the process of finalizing and executing all the agreements, probably by the end of this month, middle of this month. So Sarah will get that posted. But we already announced those awards. I should have maybe previewed that in our meeting, but we'll update the website to show what we've already said in our press release. Angela also asked, where do we find a list of partner organizations? We'll publish that on our website shortly. Michael asks, can we use the same affidavits and other signed documents for the second round, or will you want updated forms? So this is relevant for if you applied in a previous round and you're applying again. Yep, I don't think so. You're probably going to have to get new signatures on that just to make sure we're all nice and clean and complying with RFP requirements. So sorry, you're going to have to get those documents signed again. Now, when it comes to letters of support, you probably want to get those updated too, just with at least new dates on that. So it's reflective of the actual proposal you're submitting to us this time around. Is this grant for nonprofit or for-profit? So the grant, so the grant that this program will directly make will be to nonprofit organizations that will be running revitalization programs. They will then in turn subgrant out to a variety of organizations that could include a for-profit entity. So hopefully that clarifies that. Angie asks, have all round one funds been awarded by partner organizations and individuals? No, actually none. We're still in the process of developing those programs and deploying those. So we expect, if you're thinking about what's the timeline, if you're submitting a proposal, what's the timeline for this? You're going to submit a proposal to us. Let's say you get awarded, then you're going to have to build that program. Now, some folks may already have maybe a further ahead than others in building out a program, or already have an existing program that they can just retrofit for this use. But we expect there's going to be some development time to actually deploy the stuff, and that's what we're at. That's where we're at with round one. Is we're still all those partner organizations are still in the process of developing and deploying those programs. And Dwayne asks, does partner organization have, do we have a list of partner? We'll publish that. Greg asks, within the designated corridor, is there a minimum cutoff number of benefiting businesses? If there's only one business so for example, what if there's only one business in the corridor that's part of the proposal? Is that enough? Really, we want to see at least more than one, right? Now, you don't necessarily have to identify every single potential eligible recipient within a corridor, right? Even though you may already have some in mind, everybody's going to have to apply no matter what. But we don't want to just see just one-off projects. Like what is the actual corridor strategy? Presumably, a Main Street has more than just one eligible recipient on it. But if you're looking at a corridor and it only does have one potential eligible recipient, I mean, make the case. By all means, you're welcome to make the case, but it's going to be a tough case to make. We really want to see a particular, specific corridor, and then how multiple entities in that corridor may benefit, regardless of whether or not they actually do get funded. The opportunity should be made available to more than just one entity within that corridor. Another question is, can dollars come from the city or the county? Yes, totally. Encourage it. If the city wants to prioritize or county wants to prioritize funding for this program, and there's a potential for partnership there, definitely encourage that. That goes to the strength of the proposal. And another question is, how do we become a partner in agency? How you become a partner in agency is by submitting a proposal to this program, and of course being awarded. You could also think about if there's potentially multiple partner organizations within an area, how you might collaborate to put a joint proposal together, and who's going to be the lead for that. Another question is, can PCA provider agencies apply for this grant? PCA provider, I'm assuming that means personal care tenant provider agency. Sorry if my acronyms are off. Can they apply for this grant? They could potentially be eligible recipients of grant funds or loans, but I don't see how they would be direct partner organizations through this. I'll just leave it at that. Dusty asks, if a community foundation is applying for a grant, do we determine how much based on the number of projects that they have in mind? Yeah, even if it's speculative, even if it's not totally clear how many projects you're going to fund, yeah, we want to see, an area and the total potential and the total potential impact, and how that aligns with your requested allocation. Rose asks, how can we determine an appropriate partner agency to apply for grant funding from? So one thing is once partner organizations stand up and request funds and are awarded funds, they're responsible for getting the word out on making sure folks within their service areas know that there is an opportunity to get funded. And we will also do our work to publicize those opportunities. So, so basically, we'll publish it on our website. We'll put out press releases. We'll draw media attention towards those organizations that are doing this work, and then once they make their funding opportunities available, you'll have an opportunity to request that assistance. Greg asks, for Greater Minnesota organizations, if we are applying on behalf of multiple corridors and separate communities, is there a cutoff in the amount? So, like, I think what the question is how many different corridors can you propose, or main streets can you propose as part of your overall proposal? There's no specific cutoff. There's no like minimum. It could just be one corridor. It could be multiple corridors. The key thing there is, if you're proposing 20 corridors or 20 main streets, does your organization have the capacity to handle all that? That's a lot of work. And so that's my only comment on that. And then in terms of the total request, we want to make sure that the request reflects the actual demand and the use of funds. We want to make sure that there's statewide representation in all these funds. And I didn't mention this in the main presentation, but at least no more than 65% of the funds can be in any one area, either an area defined as either Greater Minnesota or the Twin Cities metropolitan area. And so this time around, the first round was heavily metro. It was about 70% of the funds went to metro based projects, and so this time around, to make sure we hit that balance, we fully expect and are encouraging about 50% of funding to go to Greater Minnesota this time around. And then in terms of what you can request, don't be shy about requesting an amount that reflects what you actually want to do and think you can get done. There is no upper limit, so to speak, on the total amount of funds that you can request, but you have to demonstrate how you're actually going to do that work, and if that's an appropriate amount. Arboretum project. This is a little bit more specific than I can get into now. So Valerie, please send us an email and we'll address your question about the Arboretum specifically. Dusty asks, please give examples of matching funds for a community foundation applying for the first time. So if your community foundation has been doing fundraising, let's say your community was impacted by a fire, right? And you solicited donations from surrounding, from private sources or public sources to go help rebuild, right? And you have a fund set aside specifically for that. That would be an example of matching funds. Or let's say one of your partners runs a loan fund and they want to establish a loan fund to serve communities impacted by that fire. That would also be matching funds. And matching funds also includes what the eligible recipients might be bringing to the table. So, for example, if there's a nonprofit, they want to build out a community arts center, and they've been fundraising for this, and they could potentially apply for these funds to finish out their capital campaign. That would also be matching funds. So, and then, thanks, Eric, for listing first round awards. Greg asks, if one of those Greater Minnesota corridors in the request is a weaker part of the request, will there be line item eliminations or will entire request be disqualified? I mean, obviously you want to put the strongest proposal forward. And if, you have, 3 really great corridors that like you got the partners lined up and everybody is ready to roll, and there's a 4th one that isn't quite fully baked yet, I mean, you may not want to include them. You won't necessarily, I can't say you wouldn't be penalized for that, but, put your best foot forward, so to speak. I guess that's all I can say there. I will say that if the proposal comes forward and there is Oftentimes, if you request an allocation, we won't necessarily award you that full allocation. Um, we do reserve the right to make like line item awards, so to speak, or adjustments, but we also can give you the flexibility to decide where you want. If, for example, contingent on availability of funds, you don't get fully what you request, you can have some options to scale back as you see fit to reflect the actual final award amount. So sorry, Greg, I don't have a more specific answer for you. Jana asks, if the property is a mall with multiple entities, do you consider the mall one recipient, or can each business inside, oh, this is a really good question, be considered separately? So this is about these are capital improvement projects. And so, it would necessarily then follow that the capital improvements would be for the facility itself, like a mall, and of course the owner of the facility. And so, no doubt each business could potentially benefit from those capital improvements, but the way I'm thinking about it now, the mall owner operator would be the eligible recipient that then could apply for that. Stan asks, if we're seeking $500,000 in grant funds, is our match requirement 30%? Do these funds need to be paid back to deed? Do we lend these funds out at what interest rate? Trying to make sure I understand this question. So I think there's a couple questions here. So if you're seeking $500,000 in grant funds, you will then sub-grant that out. And of course, you're not going to pay that back to us. That's a straight cash grant through the partner organization to the eligible recipient. Now, to get that, you need to identify the 70% matching, which could come from loans, either sourced privately through the eligible recipient or sourced from if you're a lender yourself. And then I want to make sure you understand how the loans work. Is that we're only going to guarantee those loans. Eric, can you mute? I'm hearing some static there.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. I want to make sure you understand how the loans work. Is that you're going to loan your own dollars out, and then we will guarantee up to 80% of the value of that loan for up to a $2 million loan. And so if there's a default, if you lend out your dollars to a project and, let's say 5 years from now, it goes into default, we will purchase 80% of the principal of the remaining principal on that loan. So we'll actually pay you. You're not paying back us. Paying us back. Now, if you request an allocation, and let's say you request $1 million, and in the end you're only able to award out 800,000 of that, we will request that $200,000 back, so then that we can reaward. So I hope I'm covering all the bases embedded in that question. Faith asks, can you provide a link to deed requirements for general contractors and subcontractors? Will deed provide any flexibility in these requirements in order to increase the number of MBEs, WE subs? It's a very specific question that I do not have an answer to right now. But yes, of course, we will do that. So thanks, Faith, for that, and we will follow up. And I just want to say we are at time. But I'm happy to stay on for another 15 minutes and answer these questions. But I want to give everybody the opportunity to pop off if they have other appointments to make. We will make this recording available on our website. So with that, I'll say goodbye to everybody that needs to leave now. And then as long as there's at least one other person here besides my colleague Paul and Eric, I'll just continue to run through these questions. So I'll just give a moment for people to pop off. And once again, thanks for attending. Thanks for your time and consideration on this, and for all the work you're going to be putting in and putting good proposals together. So I'll just wait a minute, and then I'll just keep going. Fine with you, Eric? I see a nod, yes. Oh, yeah. Over. Yeah, awesome. So I'll just keep going, and Angela asks, are in-kind donations considered matching funds? Generally, no. I'm just gonna say generally no. Um, but if, for example, an organization is like donating kitchen equipment or something like that, I mean, maybe there's a case to be made that something like that could be an in-kind donation, but generally, no. We're looking for cash match. Um, If businesses are using cash or donations for matching funds, do they need to provide proof of funding of the amount? Yes. When they apply to a partner organization for funds, they need to show and demonstrate that they have full funding. And so you'll have to develop requirements around how they demonstrate that. And then you need to tell us, and then we can fund the grant. Can DEED approve a grant amount less than what we apply for, or is it all or nothing? Oh, yes. Um, it's quite often that funding requests are oversubscribed, and we reserve the right to adjust to make sure that we're hitting equity goals, that we're hitting geographic representation goals. And so oftentimes a request may be a bit lower than, or the final award will be a bit lower than your request. Jasmine asks a great question. Could funds be applied to a housing project? Assuming other components of the project are within the bounds of the program. Yes, entirely. A housing project is perfectly eligible. Of course, it has to be within the commercial corridor, but one can imagine a project that applies that's mixed-use development. Love that. It's gonna provide commercial space, new commercial space on the ground floor, provide housing above. That's a perfectly eligible use for a grant or a loan. Are transportation companies eligible for these grants? Well, these grants are for facilities, so in so much that a transportation facility is within an area, potentially. They're not necessarily ineligible by the nature of being transportation company, but we're not purchasing cars here. We're building buildings or rehabbing buildings. And looking for more questions, and then I think we're going to wrap up here pretty soon. So, how do businesses find and locate a potential partner organization? This question came up before. Um, we will, of course, publish who the partner organizations are. We've already shared that link for round one. And then those partner organizations, once the programs are up and running, are responsible for outreach and making sure folks in their communities and their service areas are aware of this funding opportunity. Lori asks, as a nonprofit, if we apply for a loan as part of our project, is the lender the applicant for DEED, or are they a partner on our application? Yeah, the lender, yeah. If I'm understanding correctly, if you're a nonprofit that's seeking a loan for a project, it's the lender would be the applicant to DEED, either the lender directly or they're partnering with another organization that's submitting for an allocation. And then they would be allocated a certain amount of loan guarantees that then they can use as the basis for their loans. Kathy asks, could a retail mall be eligible? Or only if it is identified in a corridor? Yeah, retail mall could be a subject of a grant or a loan, but we want to see, what's the overall corridor strategy for that. And Lee asked, hi Lee. I think Lee will get the last question, or if you have one more question, please drop it in the chat, and then we're going to wrap up. We've been approached by a community that's looking to support Main Street businesses through some necessary street sewer improvements. District has been hit hard by COVID, and the cost assessments will be killer on top of that. Would this be a since March 15th definition? So a couple key things is the funds can't be used for publicly owned properties, streets and things like that. In so much, infrastructure is an eligible use of funds, in so much that it's a part of a supporting project. The other question embedded here is, if a business is getting an assessment because of that work, can they be compensated for that assessment from these funds? The answer is no. They can't be compensated for that. But if, for example, business is hurt by a decline in business activity due to the construction, and that construction is an ongoing thing that exists after March 15th, yes, that is definitely a condition. We can think about, classic case I would think about is like the Green Line construction disrupted a lot of businesses on University. And so resources were made available to those businesses, either in low interest loans to keep afloat, or even some financing to improve their actual physical facilities to attract more customers. So yes, I think I've answered your question, Lee, that major construction, public construction project would be a disruptive eligible category. So thanks for bringing that up. I hadn't thought of that, but yes, that would be an eligible condition. Do partner organizations pre-screen projects to be included in the proposal? They can, they're not required to. No doubt you're going to be talking to folks in your communities and they may have like a really good idea. Maybe there's a historic theater and they want to turn it into a mixed use facility. By all means, you can talk about that in your proposal, but they're in the end going to have to apply to you anyways. But you can talk about how that is part of a overall corridor strategy. But what we don't want to see is, we're just going to fund this one transformative project and then that's it. That's not what we're looking for. Though transformative projects can be the subject of loans and grants from this program. All right. Yeah. Jim, I don't know if you're able to unmute. Let's see. I think I can unmute him. Can I?
Can I ask my question?
No? Okay. Jim, did you have a question?
Let me ask you a question.
Okay. So not hearing any more questions. Once again, thanks for those for hanging on for the bonus round of questions.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, hi. Yes.
Hi. I have a question. I'm in a neighborhood and there's a lot of things happening in my neighborhood right now. There's a school that's closing that I would like to develop into housing. There's a hospital that's been torn down. There's a historical society that wants to expand, and there's a building that has been bought by a nonprofit, but I'm not sure exactly how they're going to expand the historical society into that building, but they're right next to each other. There's a grocery store that just changed hands. It's a small, privately owned grocery store, and then there's a long-term health care facility, and it's all in this neighborhood. And what I'm thinking through is, I'm interested in doing the housing in the old grade school, but there's these other commercial, quote unquote commercial properties that are all within this neighborhood. Would that qualify as a geographic corridor?
Yeah, I mean, there's close physical proximity. There's a concentration of activity, both workers leaving, and going, and potential for increase. If there's a closed school, what can we do to build something there that will bring employees or workers or other activity there? So I mean, it sounds like a solid. It could be a solid part of a proposal identifying that as a corridor. And then the question is like if you're a developer yourself and you're looking at this property, and how to develop it, the question I'd be asking is what is the right partner organization to apply? Maybe it's your organization, I don't know, but what's the right organization to apply and get an allocation of either grants and or loan guarantees to target that area as a comprehensive revitalization strategy for that neighborhood, and that area. So I can't offer, I don't know the specifics. And of course, you'll have to, make some phone calls in your community to find those potential partners. But, obviously it's a quick turnaround between now and the end of this month. But yeah, I mean, could be a great project. So that.
Yeah, I guess it was kind of a multiple part question, really. Like, would this qualify as a core geographic corridor? That's kind of number one. And then, given the diversity of the entities and properties involved, do you think that any one of those would be ruled out? Would the Historic Society be ruled out? Would the vacant property from the hospital being torn down, would that be ruled out?
Yeah, no. Those all sound like potential eligible uses and recipients. The only thing that might be rolled out is if it's a government-owned or public-owned facility. So, for example, if that school is being sold, if it's a school-owned property, public school-owned property, and it's being sold to a private developer or something like that, then it could be the subject to something. But if the property is owned by government, it could not be the subject of a grant or loan.
Yeah, the school would be sold. They're interested. Yeah. They're interested in selling the school. Matter of fact, I had a contract with them 2 years ago that got tabled because of COVID had just come out, of course. Yeah. And so it kind of jettisoned the project. And then they wanted the school because they had to disperse their students. But that's not, keeping the school is not in their long range plan. They are intending on selling it once they kind of reconfigure things after this whole COVID thing kind of.
Yeah, just the only thing I remind you is that the eligible use of funds does not include a
public entity.
A purchase.
Got it.
So these funds couldn't be used to actually purchase the property, but upon purchase, could these funds be used to rehabilitate or remodel the space entirely? Yes, absolutely. Perfect. Or even add more space to it. So.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Great. Well,
nice job, by the way.
Yeah, thank you.
Very nice job.
Yeah. I see a phone number 651-855. You got a question? Go ahead and unmute.
Okay. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Okay. I have a kitchen business, and I want to add to-go style restaurant to it. I found a space which is a restaurant before it was closed, and I'm looking for funds to upgrade it and for the equipment. Am I eligible to apply for the fund for the grant?
Yeah. So this is a great question. Thanks for answering it. So sounds like you're a property owner or business owner. So you wouldn't be eligible to apply directly to the state for an allocation of grant funds or loans, right? However, if an organization serving your area applies and receives an allocation of grants grants or loans, you could apply to them, right? So this program, this RFP is requesting proposals from partner organizations who will then deploy these funds to businesses like yours, right? Okay. So it's not a great, so basically it's like a wait and see to see if a partner organization is going to cover your area. Now, as a business owner and a stakeholder in your community, you may want to work with and reach out to organizations within your community and say, hey, I have this project. I'd like to get funding. I would really like you to think about, how we could serve this area. And, local chambers, business support organizations, any number of, even reaching out to your local government and asking them, hey, is anybody in our area thinking about applying, and providing some support to that. Definitely encourage that. But yeah, in the end, it's the partner organizations, the nonprofit developers, and CFIs and foundations that will be applying for these funds. So thanks for that question. And then Valerie, I see Valerie has a question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. So I asked earlier in the chat, but I just wanted to ask you our specific question. I work for the Arboretum, and we have our own 501c3 foundation, but we're also a unit of the university. And the U of M obviously has its own U of M foundation. So given those two entities, one, we would apply through either one or the other. I believe we'd be eligible to apply for funding. So that's my first question.
Apply for funding as a recipient and user of the funds, or as an intermediary who's making
as a partner organization. Because what our project idea is that we're just off of Highway 5, and there is this huge project in play already to expand Highway 5. And it's this corridor between Chanhassen, Chaska, Victoria, and there are a lot of businesses along this corridor. And so the expansion of the highway is going to drive more economic development in the area. Yeah. And part of that is that we actually have to develop a new entry and a new gatehouse for the Arboretum. So that is one project idea that then we would seek others to help us develop that project.
Yeah.
Or the other entity that I was thinking of was a new Apple House, because that's another part of our project that is in the works. It's part of this expansion.
Yeah. So the key thing here is now is the Arboretum a 501? Is that the owner of the Arboretum, and then that 501c3 is then owned by the university system? Because the university system would be considered a public entity. And so in so much that the Arboretum is part of the public entity's, facilities, it wouldn't be eligible subject for a grant. So you'd have to take a look at, I don't understand all the dynamics there. So you'd have to take a look at that. And then the other aspect is that if you're a partner organization, you can't fund your own projects with these funds. And so if you wanted to, for example, secure, assuming you were an eligible subject of receiving a grant, you'd want to find a partner organization that was looking at the overall corridor that you've identified, and that the Arboretum is potentially an applicant for those grant funds or loans to do that project. All right, that sounds like, based on your description, a more appropriate role. Where you're looking to attract more customers, improve facilities, that kind of capital investment. Then if that's the case, then the question is the Arboretum itself an eligible entity for those funds? Is it publicly owned? Is it a public governmental entity? And I don't know the answer to the question. You probably do. So.
Okay. That helps clarify. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Great question. And reminds me I need to get back out there. So it's been too long.
Please come.
Yes, I love that place. All right. With that, I'm going to wrap up before my voice goes out. I've been talking a whole lot. I appreciate everybody for attending. And once again, your attention to this matter. We're very excited about this program and the potential and the impact that it will have in communities, especially during this very trying time. And as we recover, hopefully soon, from this pandemic. And so thanks a lot. And if you have any questions, please email us. And we want to make sure that you have all the information you need to put really good proposals together. So with that, thanks a lot, and we will head out.